Russell, apologies. It's like the serious settings, something wrong. Sometimes like we do have automatic interpretation, sometimes not, like for some reason. And also, Russell, regarding the handouts, we thought it would be better to keep two documents. So one is interactive exercise, and the second one is additional literature. So you can refer to two documents, and we will share them in the chat, and we'll upload them to the page as well. Alicia, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Thank you. Good. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year and happy holidays.
Okay. Now let's check the channels. I am on the English channel now. Yes. Now Russian. Прекрасно, да, слышу вас. Russell, can you see an interpretation icon at the bottom? It's either in the more section, three dots, and an icon of globe, depending on the device. And you're muted.
Sorry. I can't see a globe. I can see more apps. No, I can't see any globe. No. Where would I find it?
Like for what type of device do you have?
I have an Apple Mac at the bottom of the screen. From the right
Oh,
to the left, it has leave more apps. Um, I can share.
uh,
Oh no, I could
can you
share my
try
screen.
more? Can you
Say
try?
again.
Yeah, could you please try pressing more? Maybe the interpretation function is there.
Yes, it is. I click
Okay.
interpretation, and then I click English. Yes,
Yes.
brilliant.
Alessia, could you please speak?
If you could say something in Russian, I could perhaps pick it up in English.
Oh, sorry. That, yeah. хорошо ли слышно? Okay.
Great.
I am switching back to the original channel. Okay. Okay. And dear colleagues, in terms of the format, allow me, please, as usual, like 5 minutes for the introduction, and then only like a couple of minutes at the end of the session for the outro part. Okay, we are ready to admit the participants, and we will provide like additional couple of minutes for the others to join. Уважаемые участники, рады вас всех приветствовать на сегодняшнем вебинаре. В рамках вебинаров международных, да, Дарья Скаффолд, мы с вами в этом году встречаемся в первый раз, поэтому рада вас приветствовать с наступившими, точнее, с прошедшими праздниками. Надеемся, что у вас была возможность подзарядиться на оставшийся академический год. Давайте мы буквально пару минут еще подождем, пока присоединятся все остальные. А пока позвольте мне пройтись по некоторым техническим вопросам. Да, в первую очередь, пожалуйста, большая просьба к вам, если во время вебинара нас будет плохо слышно или видно, пожалуйста, напишите нам в чат, чтобы у нас была возможность своевременно отреагировать. Второй момент. Хотели бы напомнить то, что у нас, как и все остальные вебинары, сегодняшняя сессия будет записана для того, чтобы предоставить возможность коллегам, которые по каким-то причинам не смогли принять участие сегодня, смогли просмотреть запись немного позже. Поэтому, если вы хотите, чтобы ваше видео не попадало на запись сессии, просто выключите свою камеру. Также прошу во время основной содержательной части всех выключить микрофоны. В конце сессии вам будет предоставлено время для того, чтобы задать вопросы или поделиться впечатлениями о вебинаре. И последний технический момент – это то, что у нас сегодня основной язык вебинара – это английский с синхронным переводом на русский. Поэтому большая просьба сейчас, вот когда наш спикер начнет выступление, нажать кнопку в нижней панели, да, кнопку перевода и выбрать канал перевода с английского на русский. Так, секундочку. So I would like to also mention to those who do not speak Russian language that our session will be carried out in English with interpretation into Russian. So if you would like to listen to the original, please press interpretation, like choose the interpretation function at the bottom of your screen and choose the channel original or English for your comfort. Так, уважаемые участники, мы, наверное, готовы уже начать сегодняшний вебинар. Я попрошу переключить на следующий слайд. Да, немножко освежу вашей памяти. У нас сегодня первый вебинар в этом году. Да, мы с вами собираемся в рамках инициативы Дарья Скаффолд. Как вы прекрасно знаете, эта инициатива является частью большей инициативы Европейского Союза «Дарья», да, диалог и действия для находчивой молодежи Центральной Азии, где Европейский фонд образования является основным имплементатором, да, данной инициативы и сотрудничает с национальными органами в 5 республиках в Центральной Азии, которые отвечают за образование и развитие профессиональных навыков. И в частности, инициатива Дарья, она поддерживает стратегию Европейского Союза Global Gateway. В частности, у нас в рамках Дарья Скаффолд мы стремимся создать долгосрочные улучшения в качестве профессионального образования и обучения в странах Центральной Азии. И мы это делаем посредством инструмента Scaffold, который вы с успехом применяете уже второй год, чему мы несказанно рады. И также помимо таких вот образовательных возможностей, да, онлайн-тренингов, также очных тренингов, которые уже прошли в ряде стран, мы также стремимся создать такое очень прочное, эффективное сообщество педагогов, то есть такую сеть педагогов Центральной Азии, которые применяют Scaffold, и мы это делаем посредством двух платформ. Это, в частности, первая платформа взаимодействия – это группа в Телеграме, в которой можно в режиме настоящего времени, да, задать свои вопросы, поделиться впечатлениями, задать вопросы, поднять какие-то проблемы, обменяться опытом. И также у нас есть вторая платформа, это мини-сайт, да, где мы собираем все вдохновляющие практики имплементации Scaffold, да, также полезные инструменты для того, чтобы сделать вашу работу со Scaffold еще более комфортной и эффективной. Для вашего удобства сейчас в чате, да, мы разместили ссылки, поэтому если у вас будет необходимость, да, пожалуйста, пройдите по данным ссылкам и воспользуйтесь возможностью познакомиться со всем содержанием. Также хотелось бы очень кратко напомнить то, что сегодняшний вебинар является третьим вебинаром из серии международных вебинаров Дарья Скаффолд. У нас проводится вебинар один раз в месяц, да, и всего сессий будет 7. Сейчас на слайде вы видите полную тематику, да, всех серий. Анонсы всех вебинаров будут также опубликованы на вышеупомянутых ресурсах. Поэтому, пожалуйста, Не стесняйтесь воспользоваться данными ресурсами в Телеграме и на нашей странице в Notion. Напоминаю то, что сегодня сессия у нас продлится 90 минут. Основным языком является английский с синхронным переводом на русский. То есть взаимодействие с нашим экспертом вы можете проводить полностью на русском языке, а мы сможем помочь нашему эксперту с переводом. Да, и следующий слайд, пожалуйста. Теперь не буду отвлекать далее вас от основной цели сегодняшней сессии и хотела бы передать слово нашему эксперту Расселу Григу для того, чтобы он начал свою сессию. Рассел, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I hope you're all okay. My name is Russell Grigg, and if we could go to that first slide, please. I can't see this presentation. Would it be possible to put that on the screen?
It is on the
Yes.
screen.
Great,
Okay.
thank you very much. So a little bit about myself. My name is Russell. I work in Swansea University, which is shown in the photograph. And if you want to contact me about any questions, please feel free to do so, or contact Anthony. My email address is on the screen. In terms of my expertise, I am a teacher educator. I've worked in teacher education for 30 years, and I'm also an inspector of schools and colleges. I'm a writer, author of many books, and I have a particular interest in creativity. You can see some of the books on the screen, and they reflect my interest in education. So could we go to the next slide, please? So the objectives of today's webinar are as follows. First, I'd like to explain the concept of motivation and engagement. So we want to talk about what we mean by motivation and engagement, which I think we all agree are very important in education and in life in general. The second objective is to discuss strategies, proven strategies, that motivate and engage learners. So I'm not sure what your current roles are, but if you are educators or policymakers, then motivating and engaging learners is very important. And thirdly, I want to talk about how motivation and engagement link to scaffold and how scaffold can help us motivate and engage learners. Really, it's the educators who motivate rather than scaffold, but scaffold is a resource to help educators. So those are the three objectives. I hope they are reasonably clear. Next slide, please. So the first question we need to talk about today is, what is motivation? And perhaps you could use the chat to write what you think motivation means to you. By all means, do so. In the Russian language and in English, the word motivation comes from the Latin, the old Latin language, and it means to move. That's what it originally meant, to move us to take action, to move us to think differently. So motivation is best remembered as movement, movement of thought, movement of action. It's really important to remember that original definition or original meaning. In other words, motivation has to lead to some action. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like you please to put into the chat what motivates you. So I'll give an example. These two photographs show what motivates me. The left-hand photograph shows my subject interest. That is, my subject interest is history. So I'm motivated by anything to do with history. And one of the photographs shows me as a little boy, and I'm very interested in family history. That's one of my motivations. The right-hand photograph shows my other motivation in life, and that is football. So you can see an artist has drawn a picture of the back of me and my son going to see the football. So motivation for me, history and football. Could you spend a moment just writing in some interests or subjects that motivate you? Just put some words onto the chat, please, and maybe we could have some of those translated.
Yes, Russell, we've already got 2 answers from Tatiana. She says that student success as well as nature motivate her the most. Student success, yes, student achievements.
Thank you. And that's very important. We're going to talk about student achievement in a moment when we come to motivation in learning. In general life, have a think about what motivates you generally in life. So is it a particular passion that you have? Is there an interest or a hobby that makes you get up in the morning and jump for joy? What is your motivator? Before we get to learning and school and education. And again, if anyone has written anything generally in life outside of schooling and education, perhaps we could have some shared thoughts.
So we've got
Yes.
another answer. Our kids, I mean,
Yes.
Tatiana's own family.
Yes. So family is a very important motivation for us. And also, if we're honest, money, finance can also be a motivator. Promotion can be a motivator. Social status can be a motivator. So let's now go to the next slide and talk about a little more detail about motivation. This is a definition by 2 academics who are experts in the field of motivation. They say to us that motivation is about energy, direction, and persistence in our behavior. It's about initiation and regulation. There's a lot of words in that definition, so let's explain what they mean. The first definition I gave a few minutes ago said that motivation is to move us to take action or move us to think. This definition says motivation has to have energy. We've got to really want to get up and do something. So energy is really important. All of us as educators have been in classrooms where some children, some pupils seem to have low energy. They don't seem to be very motivated. Sometimes their body shows you that. So motivation is like an energizer. It really drives us forward. Direction is the way we travel. So motivation in education, we've got to direct learners in the right way. We've got to motivate them to do the right things, not motivate them to do the wrong things. So we'll talk about that later on. So direction is important, motivating learners in the right way. The third word persistence. To be motivated, sometimes motivation goes up and down. We want children, learners, to keep at it, to persist in their learning. So we want to think of things that help them persist. It's also about initiation. This is about self-motivation. We want to think of how scaffold can help educators so that children are self-motivated. They don't rely just on the educator. They want to do something. We need to talk about that today. And that's also about regulation. Regulation is learners thinking for themselves what they might do differently, how they might change and improve something, what decisions they might do differently. So that is a complex definition, but they're important words: energy, direction, persistence, and initiation. Can we go to the next slide, please? This short quote is important because it explains that motivation is usually a problem not from the learner, not from the child or the pupil. It's not something wrong with them. It's usually because of the way we've designed our lessons, our design of our program, our teaching. So in other words, the teaching planning has not given enough thought to how we can motivate the learner. We often say in teaching, oh, they're not very motivated. We should be asking, what can we do to motivate the learners? How can we help them be engaged and interested in the learning? So it isn't about them, it's a responsibility for us as educators. Of course, there are factors beyond the school that come into play: family, home, other circumstances that play on children's minds. Next slide, please. So, what does research tell us about motivation of learners in your part of the world, in places like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan? So what do we know about what the research tells us? The OECD, which stands for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, it's a very big organization, which many of you will have heard of, gives us some research findings. Here's the first one. Most families, you can agree or disagree with this, but the research in your part of the world says most families value education. They value it. They see it as important. The second finding from research is that many people in Central Asia, their motivation comes from job prospects. In other words, the opportunity to career advance. And linked to that, the research tells us that many students work hard in school because they want to get on in life, which is nothing wrong with that. They want to get on in life. They want a better job, a good career, particularly in science and language. So that's what the research says about motivation in Central Asia. However, next slide, please. The problem we have is that research also tells us that learners, while they might be motivated to get on, get a better job, many of them are bored in schools. This is what the OECD reports when they did a survey and listened to what people had to say. Learners are often bored in school, partly because the way we teach, partly because they are trying to memorize information for examinations, and partly because they're not actively involved in lessons. So there's a challenge. On the one hand, we want to make sure children do well at school, get good exam results. But on the other hand, we want them to be engaged because we want them to learn skills for life, not just for a particular qualification. We want them to learn life skills, which is what Scaffold is trying to promote. In some parts of Central Asia, the research tells us that rural schools, schools in villages, don't have the resources, say the internet connections, don't have the teachers of the high quality, which also raises challenges for motivation. In other words, if you're a policymaker, some children in some parts of the country may be working with teachers who are less skillful. That's a challenge for the system. What training can be put in place to motivate the teachers? Can we go to the next slide, please? So, what do we need to change? There are just a couple of things to think about. As teachers, we need to try and make our lessons more practical so that learners are more engaged. What we call active learning. Things like projects, opportunities to ask questions, opportunities to work together, opportunities to apply what they learn in school to what is happening in the real world. That's the first thing we need to change to try and increase practical learning. Secondly, we need to train our teachers and develop our teachers. This isn't just a challenge in Central Asia, it's a global challenge. If you read reports from around the world, where I work, we have that challenge, trying to encourage our teachers to make connections. When I finish this call, just across the road, I'm going to go to a school where we're doing a project of how can we make learning real. So what we're going to do in a couple of hours, we're going to go outside with the learners. It's pretty cold here in Wales. We're going to go outside and we're going to look at the area and we're going to look for evidence of the past. We're going to do some questioning about history and look for landmarks that tell us about the past. So making connections is really important to the real world. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? This webinar is about motivation. It's also about engagement. So we need to think about what is engagement. Engagement is simply where the learners are actively involved in their learning. So the emphasis is on them doing more work than us as teachers. The question to ask is, who does most work in the classroom? Is it us as educators, or is it the learners? Engagement is trying to shift the involvement of learners. If you look at the photograph, the child there is very engaged in nature. Nature is said to be the third educator, the main educator, if you like, outside us and the family. That child is engaged in what is happening in that environment. So engagement is about actively involving learners. Can we go to the next slide, please? Why does engagement matter to employers? When children leave school, we want them to be engaged in their workplace. We don't want them just to be engaged in school. If you look at the survey, this was a survey around the world recently undertaken by a company called Gallup. And they asked workers from all over the world what matters to employers, why engagement matters to them. And businesses and other employers said that engagement matters because if our workforce are engaged, interested in their work, customers are more engaged. So if you're working in a shop and you're a shop assistant and you are smiling and you are interacting with the customer and you're saying, Victoria, nice, I hope you have a good day, or you're trying to have a conversation, that will make the customer go away and think, oh, that was a good experience, that was pleasant. Although I don't know how many of you have been to America, but sometimes when you go to America, sometimes it can be a little bit false. You can go into a cafe and a restaurant and they are very, very open. Have a nice day. It's got to be genuine engagement. It's got to have that genuine engagement with your work. So for employers, it matters because customers think good of the business. It also matters because sales increase. If the workers are engaged, sales increase. It also matters because if you think of your job, whatever your job is, if you love your job, you are less likely to be absent. 78% of employers said that absence was less when their workers were engaged. That's true, surely. When I go to work, I love my job. I don't want to be absent unless I'm really ill. There are, sadly, in our part of the world, some people take every opportunity not to go to work. But if we can engage them, then that can increase attendance and well-being. And this is true generally, that if you are passionate about your job, engaged in your job, you feel better. And that is exactly the same in education. If children are engaged in their work, they have a good feel about school. If they enjoy lessons, they have a good feel about it. I'm just going to stop for a moment and ask you this. Where I live, when children go home, parents often say to their children, what did you do in school today? Is that question asked in your part of the world? Do you know, if your parents, do you ever ask your children, what did you do in school today? Does anyone ask their children that question? I don't know whether anyone's responded there, Victoria.
The answer is yes.
They do. Okay. Well, what's interesting, I don't know what your children say to you, but whenever I ask that question of my two children over the years, I get very little response, except when they go on a visit, except when they do something really exciting, like go outdoors, except when they have a scientist come in and talk to them about some experiment. So in other words, they only tell me when they're really engaged. And that maybe in 100%, it's 5% of the time. And that's quite sad. And that's only my experience, but you may have similar experiences. So we've got to do something about engagement. We've got to think about our learning design. Next slide, please. This is a more detailed definition of engagement. Engagement, we spoke about motivation earlier on. Engagement is about attention, how attentive learners are when we're talking to them, how attentive they are. In this photograph, that little girl is very attentive to that lizard. She's looking at that lizard very carefully. It's about attention. It's about curiosity. So a sign of engagement is if children are asking us questions, they're asking you about the subject. And it's about passion. It's about them wanting to know more when the school bell rings to the end of the lesson. And that's always a good success as an educator. If a learner stays on at the end of a lesson and asks you a question and say, oh, can you tell me about that stir on this? Those are signs of engagement. Or if they come back to you the next day and say, look what I found out about. Engagement is very, very important. So that definition is more detailed. Attentive, curious, passionate. Next slide, please. So here's a little task. I wonder whether you could write, some of you did this earlier on, so if you've done that, that's fine. But this question is more about one thing you think motivates your colleagues or those that you teach. So you work in a team. So how well do you know your colleagues? I wonder whether you know what really motivates them. So if you're working as a teacher or as a policymaker, I wonder if you know what motivates them. Or the people you teach, the children you teach. Could you just put a couple of words in the chat, please? And maybe we could have them read out, some of them.
So Russell, we've got two replies. So the first one from Saule, she says that the professional development or professional qualification enhancement motivates colleagues because that affects their salary level. Then there's a reply from Ainash. She says that scholarships is also what motivates students. And also a good salary, a reply from Tolkien. And teacher attestation, teacher certification is the answer from Madaniyat.
Thank you. And all of those, of course, are very important, and they are found in many countries. You know, teachers are motivated by professional development, qualifications, a good salary, all these things matter. But the next part of this webinar is we're going to talk about different types of motivation. So what is that motivates us in different ways? Just before we do that, we're going to summarize the difference between motivation and engagement. So could we go to the next slide, please? So just to be clear, motivation and engagement go together, but they are different. So motivation, think of that as why students do what they do. Motivation is why they persist, why they act the way they do. Engagement is how. How do they behave the way they do? How do they feel? So how engaged are they, or why did they do that? So it's a why and a how question that we're dealing with today. Why do learners act the way they do? How can scaffold help us to engage them? Okay, next question, please. Next slide, please. Let's now talk about types of motivation. many of you will know this, so I apologize if I'm telling you what you already know. But there are two basic types of motivation. There is intrinsic motivation, what comes from within, okay? And that could be your interest. I said earlier, for me, it's going to football matches. That really motivates me internally. Satisfaction. It could be you're satisfied by the task that you're doing, whether it's doing a jigsaw puzzle or whether it's putting together a model or whatever it is, it's the satisfaction you get from the job that matters. My grandfather said to me many, many years ago, if you ever get a job that you would do without pay, you've succeeded in life. And I thought about that. He said, if you could ever get a job in your life, that you would do it, even if you weren't paid, that's success for you in your life. And that I feel that's a really good barometer of internal motivation. If you would do something not for pay, not for reward, because you just want to do it, that's internal motivation. The second type of motivation is external, and that is driven by what you've said. You said certification, salary, grades, for students getting high grades. And both of those motivations are important. It's not that one is more important than the other. Both are important. Ideally, Scaffold is trying to help us develop internal motivation. And I'll explain why in the next part of the webinar. So let's go to the next slide, please. Why does motivation matter? Well, if we can get students internally motivated, it will actually help them externally because they will be more engaged, they will work harder, and they're more likely to get better grades. Motivation can also help with creativity. If you're well motivated, you are likely to feel better and you might create more ideas, you might be more relaxed, you might want to suggest things because you're motivated to solve a problem. And motivation supports social skills. It's wonderful to work with a group of people who are well motivated. I'm not going to ask any of you if you've ever worked in a team of people poorly motivated. I have. I've led teams who are poorly motivated, and that's really hard work. And that's a challenge as a leader, trying to motivate people who are not motivated. So motivation is really important. Next slide, please. Of course, there are many factors that influence one person, but not another. So far, we've spoken generally about motivation. But if you think of yourself now, not other people, which of those on the right motivate you most? If you had to put them in order, and right at the top, this is your most motivating factor, and then at the bottom, your least motivating, what would you put? You might put it on a bit of paper on your desk now. Which of those is the top motivator for you? You don't need to share it with me, but have a little time to reflect on those factors for a moment. I'm just going to write down my list because I should do the same exercise. Okay, so we've, I should put you on the spot, Victoria. I wonder whether what would be top of your list. Do you mind if I ask you?
I would say that number 2 would be the top, but also based on my previous experience because I worked in creative industries. So I would always put creativity at the top.
Yes, thank you, Victoria. And that was Not very nice of me to ask you there, but thank you for your contribution.
Yeah.
And the reason we're doing this is because if you look at
Я
what the
написал на чату.
research...
Я написал на
Oh,
чат.
someone else could... Yes.
Yes. So basically in the chat,
Oh,
yes.
oh, lovely. Please
so,
share it with us.
Yes. Madiniyat mentioned that creativity would come first for him. And then for Saule is number 3, basically the support for social and emotional, like soft skills, basically.
Yes, thank you. This is interesting. If you compare it to what the research says, if we go to the next slide, we'll show you what the global research says of a survey. If we go to the next slide, please. There we go. So if you have a look there on the next slide, it will give you percentages. So okay, so I'm not sure if that's come up, but slide 20, is it showing the percentages? I'm not sure, Victoria.
It's the one after. Yes.
There you go. Thank you. So this is what I'll share the source with you if you want to know. It was a global survey, and they asked what motivates people the most. And it is, in fact, external factors, pay, that motivates most people. So in a moment, we're going to talk about external and internal motivations with Scaffold. But the reality is most people around the world are motivated by pay, then a healthy work environment, and then you can see positive feedback. They're very close, but it is actually external things that motivate people in work. Maybe that's obviously slightly different for children, you could say. So let's go to the next slide, which I want to introduce you to some science or theory about motivation. So this theory is called self-determination theory. And this is a little bit of science of learning to help us understand what we can do to help motivate learners. So according to self-determination theory, we need to do 3 things to really motivate ourselves, our colleagues, and our learners. These are the 3 things. Let's go to the first one. Next slide, please. So the first thing self-determination theory says is we need to encourage choice, if possible. We need to give learners the feeling that they have choice and control over their actions. For example, in Scaffold, there are lots of opportunities where children can choose the task that they want to do, or they can give an opinion if they're working on a project. The choice, the theory says, is a big motivator. If you think about this webinar, some of you are more motivated if you have the opportunity to contribute. And motivation is linked to choice. So choice is really important. Can we build in opportunities to choose options, make decisions? Autonomy is really important. And the visual is trying to show that it's not a single pathway. In our work with students, can we give them options? You might choose A, B, C, D. It may not be a limitless options, because actually, for those of you really interested in this, if you're motivated by motivation, there is something called paradox of choice. I don't know how you translate that. It's called paradox of choice. And what that means, if I illustrate to you, if ever you go again to places like America in particular, if you go to Walmart, I don't know if you know, Walmart is a huge supermarket. When you go to Walmart, you go down the aisles and there are hundreds of jams, or hundreds of cheeses, or hundreds of yogurts. And the paradox, the dilemma, you've got too much choice. You don't know which one. There's so many choices. You think, oh, goodness me, there's too many. That's the paradox. So although the theory is saying give learners choice, it doesn't mean give them lots and lots and lots of choices, because they'll be overwhelmed. So give them 3 or 4 choices. Would you like to do this? So for example, you could say in a project with children, how do you want to present your findings? Do you want to produce a PowerPoint? Do you want to give a speech? Do you want to write a short essay? Do you want to put on a little bit of a role play? Giving them choice can help motivate them. It helps with their styles and preferences for learning. Next slide, please. So we said autonomy is one thing we need to build in. The second thing is competence. We are better motivated when we feel confident about what we can do, and we can do it. So it's belief that we can do something, and actually we can do it. We have the skill to do it. So competence is, how do we build belief in learners? All of us, think back to when you were in school many decades ago for some of us. Could you all think back to a subject you hated in school? Could you all think back, please? What subject did you absolutely hate in school? Or a subject you weren't very confident in? A subject you didn't like? Is anyone willing to put the subject in the chat?
So we've
Geometry.
got a reply. Yeah, geometry.
What else have we got? Do you know, when I do this with students, can you guess which subject they always, well, 9 out of 10 puts down? Have a guess. And these are students being teachers. Have a guess what subject comes up. Which subject do you think? Linked to geometry.
Math?
Mathematics. Maths.
Okay.
Do you know, we have a major problem in Wales. No matter how motivation we try, that students don't like maths. Are there any maths experts in the room? Why is that? Why is it that children, young people do not like maths? And do you know what's interesting about motivating mathematics? Students don't mind saying it. They don't mind saying, oh, I'm hopeless at maths. What's bizarre about this? They will not say, I'm hopeless at reading, or I can't speak properly, but they will say, quite willingly, they don't mind saying, oh, I'm hopeless at maths, I'm not very good at geometry. They're quite willing to proclaim this. So there's a problem in the system motivating certain subjects. So competent belief, we can have strong belief we can do good and do well in certain subjects like art or music. And some of you might be very motivated by mathematics. So we need to work out what motivates learners individually, which subjects they struggle with and how we can help them. Let's go to the third thing we need to think about. This is called relatedness. It's a very difficult word. I don't know how it translates, but relatedness. What they mean by this is people are motivated when they make connections with people and connections with subjects and with what they've learned previously. So relatedness, a better word is connections. So what we've got to try and do with Scaffold, and it does do this, is make connections with different skills, connections with different subjects, interdisciplinary connections. So when they're doing a project, they can say, I'm learning my language skills. I'm learning to solve a problem. I'm applying geometry. I'm working out the shapes of this project. So relatedness is about connections. So let's recap. This theory self-determination theory. Self-determination means you are the driver in the bus. You're driving the car. We've got to think about choice, think about belief, and think about connections. Autonomy or choice, competence, belief, and connections. Those are the three things we've got to build in. Think of it as a triangle. Three things we've got to build in. How much autonomy do we give them? How much choice? How much self-belief? And how can we build connections? Next slide, please. So what can we do practically? We're coming to the last part of the webinar. What can we actually do using Scaffold? There are lots of things we can do as educators, and as policymakers, we can think, how can we build this into the system? First of all, provide opportunities to choose tasks, methods, and topics. Think of the language we use as educators. So use sentence stems, phrases, such as, you might try this. A phrase like this is better than you must do this. Sometimes they have to do things, of course. But if we can encourage them to think about alternatives, that's important. We call it possibility thinking. That's a phrase from an academic called Anna Kraft. Possibility thinking, thinking of possibilities. So using possibility thinking. The third thing we can do is to encourage students to set goals, targets, and give them feedback on their progress. The fourth thing, we can create a climate where students feel safe and respected, so that if they give a thought and it's, not perhaps a thought we would necessarily agree with, they feel safe to express that thought. And we're not going to be overly critical of them, unless, of course, it's a thought that is, derogatory or damaging. But if it's a thought about how to improve something, we welcome thoughts. And we mentioned using active learning strategies. The next slide gives you some visual examples of how that looks. So if we go to the next slide, please. Here are some further examples. So quizzes, if you have access to the internet and you have access to online technology, quizzes are very motivating for learners. There are lots of quizzes available. And lots of research says games and quizzes motivate children. Secondly, as I've said already, think of your students' interests, topics. We ask our students who are becoming teachers to go around their class and make a list of the kind of interests students have and build on those interests. You might look at some of the other ideas. The photograph of the kingfisher is there because you can actually use nature as a real stimulus and motivation. There are lots of really motivating videos on YouTube. And how does this relate to Scaffold? Well, one of the competencies is about using resources. And many entrepreneurial ideas are copied or adapted from nature. Does anybody know what form of transport copied the kingfisher? There's a very famous form of transport in the world, which actually, when the architects looked at nature, they looked at the kingfisher bird and they thought that design would be great for a form of transport. And now it's the fastest form of transport in the world. Does anybody know? It's a really hard question, but it's called the Japanese bullet train. And if you look online, you will see the Japanese bullet train. The designers studied birds like the kingfisher and looked at the streamline, the way that the air goes over the beak. So when he's diving for fish, and they copied that to make the bullet train. There are lots of ways you can use nature and link it to entrepreneurship, getting your students to look at stories of famous inventors who have been motivated by nature. I'll give you another example. Velcro. I don't know, Velcro, which we use to keep things together. Velcro, you can find out, was motivated by a person who went for a walk with his dog, and a burr, part of the pants, stuck to the dog, and that motivated him to create Velcro. So entrepreneurs look at nature and look at ways of how they can adapt it. The top right-hand corner, I don't know, are there any dog or pet owners in the room? Anybody love dogs? Anybody a big dog or pet owner? Nobody? Nobody love a dog? Not one dog owner in the room. Anybody own a dog? Cheer me up, motivate me by saying you own a dog. Yes, we've got Victoria owns a dog. The reason I say that is because pets, animals, are a great motivator. Oh, cats, equally important. Why I'm saying this, I wrote a book a couple of years ago on dogs in school. And you might think, what on earth has this got to do with scaffold? But you see, dogs are a wonderful motivator for children and young people all over the world. If you go on holiday next and you're sitting having a coffee, watch what happens when a dog is walking along, or watch what happens to people. They will be motivated to take an interest. So we've written a book on how dogs in school can really motivate and develop well-being and support engagement. It can actually, believe this or not, we've done studies, dogs in school can motivate readers. We have done lots of work on having children read stories to dogs. And of course, the dog doesn't really understand, of course, but the dog can be trained to show interest, and that has motivated readers. So that picture is a little collection of ideas that can motivate learners, okay? Technology is another example in the bottom right-hand corner. Many young people are motivated by technologies. And I know there are caution with technologies. We have to be sensible and safe, but we can integrate technologies. Let's go to the next slide because I'm mindful of time, actually. So what we shouldn't do, and please, I hope I don't offend anybody, but these are 3 things the research says we shouldn't do if we want to motivate learners. We shouldn't make too much of grades. Obviously, grades are there for a reason, and grades are important. Of course they are. But it's the work ethic to get the grade and how they can improve that matters as much as the grade. I know people may not think that, but all the research says grades can motivate, but for lasting motivation, it's the skills that the children learn. We shouldn't not give children choice. They need some form of choice to be motivated. And we shouldn't be overly critical. We shouldn't be, if children don't succeed first time, we shouldn't be overly critical because that demotivates. Let's go to the next part, please, the next slide. The final section of this presentation, the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to talk about scaffold. So how can scaffold help us? Let's go to the next slide. Those of you familiar with scaffold, in the next slide, please, will know that there are method cards. We'll just wait for the slide to move on. So I'll carry on talking. It's probably a slight technical hitch at the moment. In terms of scaffold, method cards are really important. The method cards are the cards that will help us with motivation. So let's talk about the method cards. The point about the method cards, if you know the method cards, is they promote active learning. So in the method cards, there's a strong emphasis on students taking part in discussion, problem solving, reflecting, not just listening to us. These are things that we know motivate children. So use your method cards. Your method cards also promote autonomy and choice. If you look at the card to the right, it's called learner-led learning. And if you read the small print, you can see it talks about encouraging learners to identify topics to explore. It talks about them identifying how they, their preferred learning and teaching approaches. And it talks about them having choice, how to evaluate their work. That's really important. So you can encourage children to say, okay, how are we going to work out whether this is a good piece of work or not? What criteria can you come up with? These really motivate learners if they've been given a problem. So you could say, well, how do we evaluate this webinar? Well, we might put in the chat, and that gives you a chance to get involved. It could be, how engaging was my presentation? It could be, what opportunities did you have to contribute? It could be, were there visuals provided? So you can come up with your criteria, and that's more likely to engage you. That's what that is trying to say. So use the method cards, really, really important. Another set of cards on the next slide, please, are we'll call them the green cards, the environmental cards. Now, they're very helpful because you can use those to promote what we call exploratory thinking, and a difficult term called political agency. So I just want to explain those terms. One is called exploratory thinking, and one is called political agency. So let's talk about exploratory thinking. What that means in simple words is, I said earlier on about possibilities. It's just getting children to think of ideas which are maybe not the usual ideas. So you might say things like, what ideas have we got about this? Or is there another way of doing this? Or what if? The words what if are really good words to use in scaffold. Just putting the words on the classroom wall, using the words every day. What if we try this? I wonder whether we could do it a different way. Those phrases, if we can get them into our routines, into teaching, they don't cost us any money. We haven't got to make new resources. All we've got to do is just change the way we talk to children. Just a small change. What if we try this? I wonder whether we could do this. And I'll let you into a secret. I don't know whether you've ever done this. One of the most successful ways to motivate learners is to pretend you don't know how to solve a problem. So, for example, I don't know why, what's happened with this technology? I have no idea why this isn't working. Can anyone help me? Most people in life are good people, that's my belief, who want to help. Students will want to help you out. But if you play, a role that you're uncertain, that can motivate. That can get them to explore ideas. So try out some of those ways. Exploratory thinking is exploring different ways of doing things. Political agency, that sounds quite difficult, but really it's politics with a small p. It's not about making huge decisions. It's about getting children to think about decisions in their schooling, decisions about how they learn, decisions about who they work with, decisions about maybe changes they could make in the school environment, maybe to make better use of the conserving or saving energy. How can we save energy in the school? How can we be more environmentally friendly? How can we reduce litter? It's those kind of decisions that we're trying to encourage children to make. Okay, how can they make the world a better place? How can they make the school a better place? How can they make the community a better place? How can they reach out to people in the community? We are doing a project at the moment on loneliness, and we're trying to get young people to help with the loneliness of older people in life. So we're going to get the children to visit centres with elderly residents and talk to them and share with them what they're doing in school. That is social entrepreneurship. That is social skill. It's intergenerational learning. These are really important projects. Environmentally, of course, it's about trying to improve the resources, make the best use of the resources that we have. Okay, the next slide, we're not going to do this, but there is a handout, I think, Victoria, that colleagues can access. And I'd like you, please, not now, but in your own time, you might want to look at that handout. I think they have access to that, will they, Victoria?
Yes, absolutely. I will share the file now in the chat, but also it will be available afterwards.
Good. I'll give you a moment to do that.
Okay, it's up.
Brilliant. So that task, when you have a chance to look at it, it's really to work with colleagues in your work in education and to see how you can motivate, develop motivation skills using the theory about agency, about relatedness, autonomy, those kind of ideas and competence. So it's an opportunity for you to apply the theory in your context because you work in different places. So it's a chance for you to take it away and have a go at the theory. Okay, thank you. So we come to the summary slide now, and I think there's also some references. We'll come to the end in a moment. Let me summarize what I hope we've covered today. First of all, motivation, if you remember, we said, is about moving us to do something. So after this webinar, I'm motivated to go across the road and talk to children and talk to teachers. I'm motivated to do that, okay? Because that's my passion. It means doing something as a result. Second, we said motivation often is in schooling, it's a problem with our curriculum, our design. It's not often a problem with the children. Children might not be motivated to do mathematics, but they're not born in the world. They don't come into the world thinking, I hate mathematics. They don't do that. They come into the world, they're exploring, they're crawling along. If you've got young children, they've got putting things in their mouth, they're looking at the shape of the dummy, they're doing all these things. They are interested in the world. So it's a design feature of our curriculum, not the learner deficit. The third point is that we want internal motivation to try to develop that because that had a longer impact. You know, if we have passion and drive, that will keep us going more than because jobs change. But if we're motivated, we can continue that lifelong skills. Engagement, we said, is about how rather than the why. It's about how we're involved. In what ways are we involved? Both motivation and engagement are really important. They come together. And then the final couple of points, we introduced you to a theory called self-determination theory. And that really said we want learners to have more choice. We want to try and build their belief and confidence. And we want them to see connections in what they do. And then we touched upon how scaffold can help educators motivate learners. And we mentioned the two sets of cards, the method cards and the environmental and the green cards. And the final slide is a set of references that you might want to look at. The last couple of references, those are the studies in your part of the world. The OECD do studies to look at motivation in Central Asia. And there are studies on Kazakhstan, for example, and you can read the literature that's been written about motivation there. So apologies if we're slightly over time, but thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that useful. If there are any questions, I'm very happy to try and answer them. Thank you. Oh, great.
We've
Great. We have a bit
actually
more
got,
time.
yeah,
Good.
a little.
Great. Well, if that's the case, maybe we could look at the handout. Would that be okay for a moment? Put that on the screen?
Yes. Give me a second.
As I was worried that we were short of time, but if we put the handout up, I can actually give people a bit more help with the handout. Let me know when it's on the screen. It'll be a Word document, so we'll put it up in a moment. Okay, thank you, Victoria. So for the last 10, 15 minutes, we're going to talk you through this. This does take 30 minutes, but I'll start to talk to you about it, and then maybe you could extend it in your own time. So this exercise is really an opportunity for you to take this learning from the webinar and share it with others in your teams. So the purpose of the exercise is to support you in your understanding of how your curriculum design motivates and engages others. That's the purpose of this exercise. So wherever you are in the world, how is your program, your curriculum? How can we look at that, review it, to see whether it motivates and engages the users? That's the point of this exercise. And within that, how can scaffold help you? In particular, the point of this exercise is to look at this theory, this self-determination theory, which we covered in the webinar. And I've just made it clear so you know what those three areas are: autonomy, learner's choice; competence, which is their feeling of being capable; and relatedness, which I call connections. So those are the three things that we want to look at in this exercise. Now, it's important to note, just underneath those 3 bullet points, scaffold does not motivate learners directly. It's actually the educators really that motivate. What scaffold does, it helps us design our environment. And it's the environment then which is more likely to motivate our learners. Okay, so let's now have a look at the exercise. The first phase of this exercise, we call it a framing phase. So I'll give you an opportunity to think about this rather than me just talk quickly through it. So the first thing you can do, if you're going to do this with colleagues, is you need to introduce SDT, which is the theory. So you need to explain the theory we've covered today with somebody in your team in simple words. So if you want to ask me about the theory, you can ask me now, or you can go away and find out more about it. But you need to put it in simple language. So I've given you some examples there. So maybe for just a minute, you could think about how you would explain self-determination theory, the science of this, to others. I've given you some expressions. For example, you could say learners are more motivated when they feel they've got control. Or you could say, scaffold is a design tool to help us here. So can you just spend a moment thinking about or asking me any questions about the theory, because you'd have to explain it to others, you see. That's the first thing we need to be clear about. How do you explain choice, connections, and competence to others? Those 3 bullet points. It might be worth, Victoria, just going back to those 3 bullet points on the first page higher up. Just go up a bit, those 3 there, look. So I'm asking us all to think about, can you explain those to others in your own words, in your own language, in your own ideas? Can you give an example? Give you a moment to think about it. If there are any responses, perhaps share them with me, Victoria. I can then respond to them.
While our participants are writing
Yes.
or thinking, there is a question for after the exercise.
Okay.
To you, basically, if you could provide real life examples from your own experience
Yes.
about ways of motivating students.
Yes. Of course. I'll do that at the end. Is that okay?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Okay, I don't know whether we've had any suggestions of how those 3 ideas could be explained. Not yet?
No, not yet.
Okay, no problem. Maybe I could actually help colleagues then, because as I go through the rest of this handout, maybe it'd be clearer to you what those 3 concepts mean. And I will also answer the question which will explain those concepts with a concrete example. Okay, so if you're still uncertain, don't worry, I'll go through it with my own experience, which will help the question that was asked a moment ago. Okay, if we could just move on then to the next part of the handout. So the first thing you need to do is to think of, I would say, a recent experience that was highly engaging to you. So this is one way to explain this theory. Think of your own life experience or your teaching experience, and think of something that you were so engaged and why you were really engaged. Okay, it might be you went to a talk, it might be that you saw a video, it might be anything really that really engaged you. And then think about your opportunity for choice, competence, and relatedness. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you a concrete example, because the question that somebody asked, I'll answer it now, actually, to illustrate this. So somebody asked, what do I do to motivate learners? What examples can I give? I'll give you several examples. Let's take mathematics. Now, mathematics, I said earlier on, generally speaking, is a challenge for some learners. Yeah, they're not very motivated. So what do I do when I teach mathematics? One of the first things I do is I think about mathematics in the real world. So what I do is I always look at the use of mathematics. So so if I go shopping, if I go to the football game, I always think about mathematics, and I give the learners a real problem to solve. For example, I'll say to learners, here's a budget. Here is 500 euros. And I want you to spend those 500 euros and book a holiday in somewhere in Kazakhstan for 500 euros. And you've got yourself and 2 children. Book me a flight and get me a weekend away in Kazakhstan for 500 euros. Now, they don't think necessarily they're doing mathematics, they're doing a little problem. And I might give them a specific focus. I might say, right, with those 500 euros, I want to make sure that I have got a hotel, that I want to travel by train, public transport, and I want to take the children to one place like a museum. So that mini project will develop a whole range of mathematical skills. And in that project, children are, in my experience, much more motivated to apply their mathematics. They work together. So some of the children who struggle with maths might be very good at looking at the digital skills to look online, and they may help each other. They peer teach each other. So that works very well. Or let me give you a smaller example. When we teach students, some students struggle with percentages. So what we do with percentages, instead of teaching percentages abstractly, what we do, we say, right, is that we call it a January sales. Do you have January sales in your part of the world? Could somebody tell me whether you have January sales in the shops where clothes are cheaper? Do you have that you do? Big signs in red, sales on. So what we do to make mathematics interesting and motivating, I'll say to the children or the students, right, okay, I've got £100 to spend in the January sales. Right, can you find me those with 50% discounts? Only buy me things with 50% discount or 25% discount. So what motivates them is the context. It's not a list of problems on an exercise book. It's actual, and I'll give them a catalogue. I'll give them a brochure from the shop, or I'll take them online to look at the shops online. So I don't know if that helps, but that illustrates the first concept of choice, or at least giving them the opportunity, connections between school and the real world. That's really, really important. I'll give you some more examples of what I do as we go through the handout. So the first thing you need to do is think of scenarios, real life experiences that can motivate. The next phase is to actually think about what are the blockers? What are the things that your colleagues find demotivating, find difficult in motivating children? So, for example, it could be a lesson. You could say to colleagues, think of a lesson that you felt went very poorly, a lesson that didn't go according to what you wanted it to do. Why did that happen? Get them to reflect. And often it is down to motivation and engagement. So what you could do, some of the projects we do, you may not be able to do this. We film the lessons and we watch the lessons back, or we ask the students to fill in a short exit ticket, a form to tell us about their experience. We gather data and then we talk to our colleague about the lesson. And we talk to them about, well, did you notice what happened there? Did you notice why this might have happened? Did you notice that the children looked overwhelmed at that point? So you can use in phase 2, try and identify things that are demotivators, challenges, barriers. Ask your colleagues to explain what they find difficult about motivating their learners. It's not at this stage, we're not trying to solve the problem. We're just trying to raise awareness of why people are sometimes not motivated. To be honest with you, sometimes it's down to tiredness. Some learners, we can misinterpret motivation for tiredness. Sometimes children are very tired. They may have not slept the night before, or they may not have eaten properly. that can be a factor in demotivation. So, but we need to find out what they are. So you could connect with your learners and you could ask your learners to evaluate your work, your lessons. Simply, you could do 3 phases. You know, very well, okay, not so well. Simple traffic lights to get some indicator from the learners how they thought the lesson went. That's to identify the barriers. Now, if we go to scaffold, okay, well, how can scaffold help? Well, the first thing to do is to choose some of those scaffold cards. We mentioned the method cards, or we mentioned the green cards. And there are context setting cards. If you go to the context, you need to establish who your learners are. Who are they? What is your objective? What is your focus? And then introduce them to a competence card and say, well, what's the skill we're trying to develop here? So let's have another example, because you want examples, don't you? Let's think of an example then. Okay, so let's take a humanities lesson. I taught a humanities history lesson last week, and my competence I was trying to teach was what we call chronology, putting things in order, sequencing. That was my competence. That was my skill, my chronology, my skill. So I thought, how am I going to motivate the learners? How am I going to motivate them? So what I did, I asked them before the lesson to send me a photograph of themselves when they were young, as a child. I asked them all, send me a photograph of when you were a child, when you were about 10. And then I produced a montage of 30 photographs of 10-year-olds. And I asked the learners, I wonder who's who. Can you find Victoria in the photograph? And they were motivated straight away. They were, oh, cool. No, it's not her. Is it her? Is it her? They weren't sure. So my objective is chronology. And then I said to them, okay, what makes you think that's Victoria? Let's look at her now in the classroom. And they started to compare then and now. And we started to build a timeline of her life. So we're making a connection, relatedness, which is the third point, between an abstract concept, chronology, and their lives. We're saying, well, Victoria is only 21. Okay, so when she was 10, how many years ago is that? 11 years ago. What date is that? So we're building in mathematical knowledge into the sequence. So in short, use your learners as resources. My advice to all of you is use your learners, find out what they're interested in, find out their hobbies and experiences, and build it into your lesson. That's relatedness, which is that third concept, making connections. Okay, let's move on very quickly then. The next point is about outputs. You see that section there about just before step 3, it says outputs. How will success be visible? Well, we need to have an output with our work. So in the example I just gave, the output was they all produced a timeline. Every learner produced their own personal timeline so that they could look at the skill of chronology in their life. And then that was the output. That was the output. The next step is to compare their timeline with others. One of the learners in the class is 38. One learner is 21. Their timelines are different. They will cross over. So outputs are what you're looking for as an output. Is it a speech? Is it an essay? Is it a presentation? You have to have some kind of outcome or output in your work. The third step is the check in your theory. So all the way through this work today, I keep saying about asking yourself, are the learners having choice? do they feel like they're making progress? Those learners in the example I gave were very motivated. They felt they were involved. And is there a connection? And also, is there a dignity? Dignity is important. And that's about, do they feel they're being respected? Do they feel that they can contribute to the learning? Every learner has a story to tell. And while we have to introduce them to knowledge, new knowledge, we must bridge what they know with what they need to know. We've got to make a bridge. We can't just go straight into percentages. We've got to work with the children. We've got to say, well, I noticed, do you know what? Let's look at the attendance list. I noticed that 5 out of 20 are absent today. What percentage is 5 out of 20? You can tell me. That is an introduction. You know, using simple sentences, really important. Eventually, with this handout, you'd want to reflect and transfer your learning. So think about how what you do supports autonomy. This supports autonomy because they're given the chance to choose. This supports self-belief and confidence because I'm encouraging them to feel they can do it. What we've not mentioned today, which is in the scaffold, is the theory of mindset. I'm sure many of you have come across Mindset by Carol Dweck. I should put in, if you know the name, that's great. But if you don't, I'll just put a name in the chat and you can Google her. Carol Dweck has put forward a theory of mindset, which says simply that there are children with a fixed mindset and children with a growth mindset. And the research shows that we need to develop children's growth mindset, which simply means having the confidence to do things. And she talks about strategies to do that. And one important sentence she says is the power of yet. The power of yet is to use words like, well, you can't do that yet, Victoria, but let's work with you to show how you can do it next week. Using the word yet is very, very powerful because it's about saying to children, you have the potential to do this. Not at the moment, but you can do it. So read about Carol Dweck's work, and Scaffold talks about that. So at the end of the handout, it's just an opportunity for you to reflect really on how you're promoting those 3 concepts. Okay, I'm going to stop now because there may be some questions, Victoria, to answer.
Да, уважаемые участники, да, мы подошли к концу нашего вебинара. Хотели бы в первую очередь поблагодарить нашего сегодняшнего эксперта. Хотелось бы напомнить, что сегодня запись вебинара, также материалы, которые мы сейчас вам показали, а также дополнительный материал с литературой, если вы хотите дальше изучить тематику, да, которую мы сегодня рассказали вам. Мы это все предоставим вам в виде ссылки, то есть вы все материалы сможете скачать, когда вам будет удобно. И у нас вот как раз в рамках международных вебинаров создаются такие вот интерактивные раздаточные материалы, поэтому, пожалуйста, когда у вас будет свободное время, да, попробуйте применить. И будем очень рады, если вы поделитесь своими впечатлениями о том, как у вас это получилось. Хотите в группе в Телеграме, хотите, напишите, может быть, имейл самому нашему эксперту, доктору Расселу, да, Григу, либо нам, то есть как вам будет удобно. И коллегам, мне кажется, тоже будет очень интересно, если вы поделитесь своими результатами. На этом мы, наверное, закончим сегодняшний вебинар. Если у вас будут дополнительные вопросы, мы всегда будем рады на них ответить. Пожалуйста, свяжитесь с нами. И напоминаем то, что все остальные вебинары в рамках серии международных вебинаров Дарья Скаффолд будут опубликованы, да, все даты, все анонсы, все ссылки на регистрацию будут опубликованы у нас в Телеграм-канале, а также на нашей странице в Notion. Поэтому, уважаемые коллеги, будем очень рады приветствовать вас и на оставшихся вебинарах. Надеемся, что сегодняшняя сессия была полезной. Желаем вам доброго вечера и благодарим за предоставленное время. Спасибо всем большое. До встречи.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.